Hello folks, and welcome to part 4 of our AQUACERAS scratch build. So today we're going to be starting work on the case itself at last. And this has been quite a while coming because I've been having to design in advance as many parts as I possibly can, trying to work in which processes I'm going to be using, but I'm now at a point where I'm kind of happy with some of the things I'm going to be doing. So I think it's about time we get started on the meat. And if you've been following the updates on our community page, well, we're going to be using this stuff, which is 10mm thick tooling plate aluminium. So this is 6082 T6 aluminium. Now, usually I use 4 and 5mm, but occasionally I use 10. So why am I using 10 for this? Because this is going to be so much thicker than before. Well, normally it's to save time, because obviously if I'm going to be cutting lots of panels, I don't really need to be using really thick aluminium, and thinner is more than strong enough. But what I want to do with this is I want to have features that are milled into the top and the bottom, and I want to have some depth to it so that I can integrate things like wiring, as well as the fan controllers and stuff like that. So to do that, I am going to be using the thicker plate, which will allow me to mount stuff in that way. And I think it should all come pretty clear what we're going to be doing later on. I'm also going to be using this later on as well for some of the other parts, like the case feet. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next part. So for now, we need to get to work on the floor panel. Now, the floor panel is a really important piece because it sort of holds the entire project together. So it does need to have as many of the features that I'm going to be putting in later on sort of taken into account. So things like the mounting and the way I'm going to be putting all the different panels on. But it's also going to be having a lot of aesthetic features put onto it, and I'm going to be testing out some rather cool processes, which we'll go into later on in the video. But before we get into the actual machining jobs, I've got some other cool stuff that I think you're going to want to see. You may recall back in part 1, I said I couldn't show you the fittings yet. Well, the time has come, and I think they were worth the wait. So these are EK's new titanium satin finish for their torque fittings, and I'm going to be using the 12mm ones to go with the stainless steel tubing that I'm using. So I was showing these back at CES with some early engineering samples, and they've since gone into production, and I think they're going to be a perfect match. I said there and then I need a batch of these for this build because they are fitting to a T, especially with all the aluminium that's going to be present, the shade and the aqua and the memory modding that I've already done. So I'm particularly happy with this. Now I'm going to be using the gold inserts for these because I think that's going to go nicely with any of the brass elements that might be in the rig, and also the cherry wood. So it's kind of a nice kind of a subtle look to it. They're not too gaudy. I don't want to have full gold on this sort of rig. It wouldn't look right. And I think it actually goes very nicely with the stainless steel tubing, because obviously the steel has a darker, sort of slightly different hue to it. And actually I quite like that contrast. It kind of brings out the materiality of the steel itself and stops it just being a homogeneous mass of silver. So I think this is a little bit more interesting. So obviously we're going to be using these satin fittings to go with all the satin panels and things that we're going to be doing, but we're also going to be doing some pretty cool stuff later on. So let's have a look at what the plan is for this metal. Now I explained what I'm actually going to be doing with the plate, but in terms of a machining strategy, things are kind of simple. So basically, we're going to put this onto the machine and go and do the roughing pass, and that's going to take out all the pockets, do the holes, that sort of thing. I'm also going to be working the clamping into the design itself. That way it can stay nice and flat in case there's any warping, because I did notice this isn't completely flat aluminium. It would have been nice if it were flat, but the real world doesn't always agree with your principles. So to get around that, I've got clamps which are going to be going here, 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 and that should keep it nice and level for all the work that I'm going to be doing. Now, after doing the first side, I know I'm going to flip it over and do the second side, but there are some parts that I'm going to be leaving out, and that's going to be all of the chamfers. Now, the reason for that is I'm going to be then refinishing this part, and then I'm going to put it straight back onto the machine, and then I'm going to do the chamfers. Now, my hope here is by doing the chamfers after the finishing, I'll be able to have a very crisp edge to them, and they'll sort of come out a little bit more polished. And that means they'll pick up the light and be really attractive. So I'm hoping that's all going to work, because I've never tried something like that before. It is done quite frequently in industry. So if you see many times you'll have anodized parts that then get remachined, so you have a very bright edge around the outside. That's the same principle as what I'm going for. Now, in terms of which finish though, I'm going to leave that until that part of the video because it's going to be quite exciting because I've never done it before and it is one of my favorite finishes. So we'll see how that goes when we reach it. But for now, we need to pop this onto the machine. In terms of the toolpathing, again, it's quite simple. I'm mostly going to be using a lot of 2D contours to rough all the way down to the very end, using tabs just to hold the pieces in place. Because I've got the clamping built into the workpiece, I'm then going to snip out those center pieces and then go at it with a 5mm end mill. That should be able to get me a really smooth finish. So I'm going to use a lot of the same techniques that I used for the fixture plate in the previous parts so that I can get a really smooth pocket that should sand down nice and easily and also be nice and flat. In terms of the end mills, the 3mm end mill is going to do the majority of the work just because, as I said before, my machine is very rigid, so I can actually get a deeper cutting depth if I use a smaller end mill, which is a bit odd, but that's the most stable way that I've found. If I use the 5mm of all of it, I'm just going to wear that tool down and I can't cut any more than 0.5mm at a time, so it's completely wasted. So I may as well use one of my cheaper 3mm and then switch to the good tools later on when I do the proper stuff. So I think with that all said and done, let's pop this onto the machine, get it cutting, and then we can skip to the next part of the video, which should be quite exciting. So we've got Ops 1 and 2 now done, and that's the majority of the cutting. So all the roughing and major finishing work was done in Ops 1 and 2, and so we basically got a finished panel. But I did say we were going to be doing something special with it, and this is what it is. Brace yourselves for the jankiest thing we've ever had in the workshop. So this is my current temporary glass blasting setup. So obviously it's not going to stay like this forever. I will be doing a video in the future making a proper one. So we're going to be putting it on one of the shelves, probably over there on that side, and then moving out the tools that are currently there to somewhere else. But for the time being, this rather large box is just about good enough. It's about the right size to be able to fit a pot like this into it, which is about the size of most of the things that I'm going to be doing. And it should do for now. Now, obviously there are some limitations here. I can't really see inside. I've got a big glass window here. This is from a 1000D, but as you can see, if I go behind it, you sort of can't see anything, so that's not really much good. But with a light on the inside, it's sort of workable. It's not great. I'll probably try and see if I can hunt around maybe for some spare acrylic that's of the right size, or maybe a different glass window from another case. That will do for the time being. The real one obviously will have a proper window and interior LEDs and stuff like that, but this will work. But what we're going to be doing is using this stuff, and these are glass beads. So if you're familiar with sand blasting and glass blasting, basically sand blasting is primarily sort of aluminium oxide, which is much more abrasive, and when you use it on aluminium, it leaves a very, very matte finish, almost rough to an extent, and that's not quite what I'm looking for. So what I want is this stuff, which is very, very fine, and this leaves quite a beautiful sheen on top of the surface, and it's the same finish that you'll find on, say, Apple laptops and stuff like that, phones, or in the case of this particular build, it's the same finish that they've used for the X570 Aqua. So I think that should match up rather nicely, and I should be able to, using my compressor, do a whole piece like this. And it'll take a little bit of time because I have a quiet compressor rather than a full-blown one, because I'm in a residential neighborhood and I don't really want to be keeping up everyone and just generally annoying them. But it should be just about okay. It'll just take a bit longer, so maybe I'll just have to switch it off and on again a little bit. But we're going to have a go at doing this. Unfortunately, I won't really be able to film it because it is a cardboard box. There's no real place for me to put a camera, and if I put, say, a GoPro inside, you won't see anything because the window's so damn dark. So what we're going to have to do is I'm just going to have to do this off camera and then show you afterwards. Now there are some other things that I've gone and done as well. So these are the screws that I'm going to be using for the clamping, much as I did with the previous ones. But I was a little bit worried that they would mar the surface after it's been blasted, because obviously I'm not actually anodizing this yet, at least, so it's going to be quite soft and I don't really want to get the whole finish scratched up. So what I'm going to do is masking tape up the side, which is going to be on the machine bed, and then on this side I 3D printed some little washers that go on top of the M6 screws. Now, instead of using regular washers, I'm 3D printed them just because I don't have any of the correct size, and this is a pretty good alternative. The fact that they're printed means they'll be nice and soft, so they shouldn't, in theory, affect the surface finish of the aluminium, because that's going to be a lot harder than the soft PLA or PETG. So that should help on that front. But for now, we need to pop this inside the unit, and I'm going to have a go at blasting it. Hopefully I'll get the results that I want, and then after that we're going to put it back on the machine and do Ops 3 and 4 for the chamfers to make it look extra shiny along the edges and have that beautiful glisten. So wish me luck. Well, that's one finished floor panel for this mod, and not only that, but being the first major panel for this mod to be completed, I think that's quite a momentous occasion. So you may have noticed I added some 3D printed parts as well. So this one over here is a cable management bar. So basically the cables from the fans on the front as well as the pumps over here are going to run into this. I can clip them into place using this 3D printed insert, which has little holes on the back so I can remove it as well. And then they flow over to here, and this is the fan controller I'm using, which is an AQUACOMPUTER Quadro. Now this mounts just into a similar mount over here. It's kind of similar to the one that comes stock, but I just wanted to make sure it would fit exactly into this case. And this will be able to control all the fans. It will also do the pumps, and I can just hook it up with a single USB to the motherboard. It'll be nice and clean. Cable's going to go from here straight to the power supply, so I'm not going to have any issues with cabling just going all over the place, being straggly. I'm going to keep it nice and neat, nice and tidy, and that's how I want it to be. Now, in terms of the finishing, well, that was quite an adventure and very interesting as well. So obviously I've never done any of this glass blasting before, and my uber jank cardboard box setup is something else, so I wasn't quite sure if it would work. Also, I wasn't quite sure how my compressor would handle it. Now, it turns out the cardboard box works okay. It's not great. It's a little bit small actually, and trying to maneuver this thing around was quite difficult, especially to get the edges. I had to cut holes in it to get it to work. And my compressor is a little bit on the low power side for it, because obviously it's a compressor for silent usage. So that means it doesn't have a very high CFM value, so I can't just keep the gun going constantly like you should be able to. I had to go in spurts, and it did eventually work out. I just had to wait for it to sort of catch up with the air, so to speak. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to film that because I got a little bit worried that the escaping sand, because it's very, very fine, would actually cause problems for the camera. I didn't want to get it into any of the workings and things, because whilst it is dust sealed, not everything else is, so things like the tripod and stuff, I don't really want to get that dust everywhere. So until I've got my new proper setup done, I think I'm just going to have to resort to either doing it off camera or maybe using something like a GoPro, which might be more suitable for that sort of environment. Now, in terms of the chamfers, now these came out so much better than I was expecting. I mean, I was hoping they were going to be good, but obviously they've got quite a shallow cut, which meant that they had a very brilliant finish. And I love how they glint and glisten when you move the plate around. So I'm definitely going to be doing that on the future parts, especially on the rear I/O, other details, maybe the fan mounts, and of course the feet. Now, speaking of the feet, that's what we're going to be tackling next. So they should basically have it so that it sits about high off the ground. And it's going to be quite an exciting one, because not only am I going to be doing more of this kind of milling, but I'm going to be using the lathe, which you probably haven't seen me use a whole lot in the previous videos. So that's going to be an exciting one. So I'm interested to see how that's going to turn out. Now, of course, the best way to stay up to date and not miss out on that is by subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And don't forget, you can also find us over on Facebook, Instagram, builds.gg, and Twitter. And whilst you're here, if you would like to support the channel, don't forget also to check out our merchandise store. We're going to be adding new things to that over time, so make sure you check back regularly. Take care, folks. I'll catch you next time.